So thank you all for being here. My name is Jervin Bolman. I'll do the panel discussion today, or I will do the panel discussion. I'll make it happen one way or another. And before we start, I'd like to make some organizational remarks. For people who have a poster or a presentation, please, or just do upload them to the Google Drive now, or after the panel discussion at lunch. If you have technical issues, come visit us and we'll help you put it in the right place. But we really need them for both the video post-production and also for our proceedings. So with that practical thing said, I'd like to invite all four presenters. We first get the slides. Okay, so we always talk about standards, and standards in FAIR mean plugging lots of standards. And of course, this is an idealized picture of standards actually happening. But in practice, we often see this. We have two standards and, well, something dangerous in between. So given that, I'd like to introduce our panelists today, which is the very friendly Lydia Pintscher, the very attentive Mark Wilkinson, the intelligent Sabine Osterle, and the very regal Barend Mons. So with this FAIR group, where Lydia works for the Wikidata and also KDE, which deals with fairness in practice and big communities. Mark Wilkinson as co-author of the FAIR paper, but also FAIR evaluator, having a very different perspective on this all. Sabine, who works for the SPHN DCC in Switzerland, deals with fairness behind very closed legal doors. And Barend Mons, also encouraging people to be fair by trying to socially engineer them into fairness, will have his own very nice perspective on it. So to open up, all the questions, also for people in the room, will be via Slido, which I will then hopefully see here. And then I can read them out and make sure that the people who are remote also have it. So I want to see lots and lots of questions on Slido. That would make my life a lot easier. And with that, I'd like to start with the first question to Lydia. And that is, what aspect of FAIR do you find most difficult to encourage in Wikidata projects?
Oh, wow. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person. I hope you're having a great time. But I was able to join remotely at least, so very excited about this. So Wikidata is a huge project, and I think of all the FAIR principles, I would say probably the accessible part is one that we're struggling with a lot, simply because Wikidata is such an open system where editors have a lot of freedom to put in data in whatever way they seem fit, and that feels right to them, which doesn't always make it easier to access that data after the fact and make use of that data to build great applications. So yeah, I would say that is the one we're struggling with the most at the moment.
Mark, I think you want to say something about that? No? You can have some water. Sabine, for you as a person who has to do FAIR beyond closed doors, how do you find this accessibility aspect working out for you in the SPHN?
I think accessibility is always, there is two parts to it. So there is, for us, we share the clinical routine data for like a secondary use, which is within a consortia. So I think here the accessibility is, of course, highly controlled. There's a lot of legal agreements to be in place that the data is allowed to be used, but then technically it's rather simple. When we then think about the further reuse, so how can we get third parties using then actually these data sets which were curated and produced within SPHN, I think here as well, there's quite a mind change shift which needs to happen about how what is the kind of conditions on the legal side. And then I think also technically, so where are good repositories to put this data? Again, in Switzerland, we are lacking such repositories. And of course, we don't want to put sensitive health data in international repositories, but there's really a lot which is currently ongoing to really make that happen.
Then for Barend, what's your greatest disappointment with people picking up a little bit of FAIR, but not enough? Or
Yeah, well, it's too many. But let me say that trying to be the promoter of FAIR to people that are not necessarily big fans to start with, I came up through the years with something Mark will find horrible, but it's you need to tune it down to what I say, the machine knows what I mean. Okay, that's what I try to bring across, including accessibility control. You know, at least the conditions under which data can be reused have to be machine actionable, so that also algorithms visiting the data understand what the conditions for reuse are. And I think that I know Luis is in the room. We have 12,000 citations plus on the paper by now. And we then have to joke that minimally half the people that read the paper have clearly, cite the paper, have clearly never read it. And Luis is more cynical than me, says, well, by the way, half the authors never read it. Because you remember that 10 years ago, we even had some people from Elsevier and others that happened to be at the meeting, and we made them co-authors. It was a bit of a tactical move, so they could at least not turn against it. But a lot of people claim to be fair, and they are not at all, or only very shallow. And that is a bit of a downside of the hype that it became. So it's very nice that fair is everywhere, but it also became a hype term, and people say, yeah, I'm fair because my funder requests it, and they are not at all.
not seeing questions coming up in Slido yet, but I've seen people type on their mobile phones. So
You're right. I could actually comment a little bit on that. Right? So the impetus behind building an evaluation system was coming from above, right? The funding agencies wanted people to be fair, the journals wanted people to be fair, and they couldn't measure it. And so it was very shortly after the publication that we were trapped in a congress, and somebody said, if you don't build an evaluation system, it's going to fail. So I did, right? As did 26 other people. Right? And we've just had a task force in the EOSC that's just ended that was founded because everyone realized that the different evaluation systems didn't give comparable results, dramatically different. And I'll tell a little vignette because it's interesting to display just how different it is, and then I'll talk about the fair because I say so. Right. So in 2017, there's actually a lot of the co-authors are in the room. So me and Luis and Michel, I saw him just come in a second ago, and Jurgen, you were a co-author on the very, very first publication of what eventually became the FAIR data point. And we designed this with the principles guiding every step. It was supposed to be the most compliant, fair thing ever invented. And I ran my evaluation system against it, and it scored 20 out of 22. There were a couple of things, it wasn't searchable, but okay. Scored 20 out of 22. Another one of the automated evaluators ran against the exact same record, scored 2 out of 24. And when I looked at the reason behind those different scores, it was philosophical differences on the interpretation of the principles, and even on the definition of data versus metadata. Mm-hmm. and so the whole idea of saying I'm fair because I say so came out of that, right? It's like they actually do believe it. and then we say, well, under whose authority do I judge? Right? I am an author, so I claim some authority, but I don't claim all authority. Right? And so the discomfort of being the author of a FAIR evaluator is real.
Yeah.
Because you get pushback, and you can't justify why you are in a position to do it. And so we're looking now the whole fair, because I say so, it leads me to the final reason I'm saying all this, is that I feel the need for a bottom-up governance mechanism around assessment, not around fair, but around the assessment. Right? And we're sort of looking at that, what would that look like? Because there are governance mechanisms around other web technologies. So
Yeah, maybe one reaction on that is that when we had a meeting a few weeks ago, 10 years of FAIR. You started here at 2014. Now we had almost exactly 10 years later, we had a meeting, the road to fair and equitable science. And we looked at a whole number of these things. And one of the things that was featured was the standard pattern that George Strawn and Peter Wittenberg have published about. We won't use the term creolization anymore because that's sort of, but it is technological diversification, as we call it. So what you see, there is this new concept coming up, electricity or, mobile phones. And the first thing you see is this technological diversification. Everybody, even evaluators, 26 people say, I'll make an evaluator. So you get a divergence. And then at some point, the pain of that technological diversity becomes too large, like with GSM or 20 volts or TCP IP. And then you get this convergence around a bottom-up critical mass standard, and then it booms. So I think we concluded we are in the midst of this technological diversification phase. And we hope that we start for the next 10 years, a convergence phase, which is very much what Mark says, a bottom-up, convergence by convenience.
But can we really have the same assessment for all kind of different data? Because sometimes I'm feeling that for us, it's really being in a very hard position with the health data, because first we have all the legal constraints, we have the protection issues, but then also we have a lot of legacy data, which uses standards which are completely not fair. But I'm not in the chance to change the.
can't say that. R1.3, you're fair if you follow community standards.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they are fair.
I think Lydia would like to
But they
respond to
are
that.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, to something earlier, you were talking about how people are basically using fair as a label to mark their data as good. That reminds me very much of what the open source initiative has been going through with the definition of open source, and trying to define for the world and being a steward of that definition. And right now they're very much struggling with what this open source definition that they've been shepherding for many, many years means in the world of OpenAI and what OpenAI actually means. So maybe there are some inspirations to take from that angle as well.
Sorry.
Well,
No.
maybe it's good to make a confession as well after 10 years. And that is that I've been fighting this fake fair or pseudo fair idea too hard, in the sense that I got very upset when people ignored what was already in the abstract. It's about machines that understand stuff. Because if you say, oh, it's fair for people, then a PDF is fair because people can find it, access it, read it, So, but one of the things that came out in this very down-to-earth evaluation after 10 years a few weeks ago was that we have to acknowledge different levels of machine actionability. And I know it's swearing in church for some people in this room that say schema.org is shallow semantics, useless, blah, blah, blah. But if your goal is that your text mining algorithm doesn't make all kinds of disambiguation mistakes simply by labeling ambiguous terms with a label, then at that level, you have achieved a very first level of machine actionability. That doesn't mean it's fair in sense of fully fair. So we should not be too dogmatic or zealotic as well and saying you have to be completely fair and machine actionable, because it all depends on what is your goal and where do you need the machine to help you, and then you make it life easy for that machine. And I think your evaluator allows for that, saying, for example, what is rich metadata? Are the metadata rich enough? It's an R principle. That's a decision of the community. And after that decision, you may evaluate it, whether they filled all the required metadata fields. But you cannot do that without the community defining that.
Yeah.
So it's normal that sometimes you score 22 out of 24.
So I have some questions from the audience.
I just want to comment on what was said just now, because there was something that came up in the very last meeting of the EOS task force. The EOS task force was unfortunately named Fair Metrics and Data Quality. And what was just said was fair is good data. Like, no, fair is fair data.
Yeah.
They're completely independent issues.
You can have totally crap data and make them fair,
Yeah.
and they become worse because
And-
they look better.
Yeah, and this is the concern that came up at that meeting was that people are making that equivalence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the question from the audience is, where would you plot fair on the Gartner hype cycle? And I'd like to hear Sabine's opinion on this one first, and then I'll go through past all the panelists.
I think it's most probably already a bit down the slope, but I think, as Barend said before, we are quite on the hype. As I said, I get a lot of the requests for review of a paper where, yeah, as you say, reading the abstract, it's like the first thing which comes to my mind is like, sounds like fake fair, also a lot of applications for projects. So I think, yeah, it is quite up the top, but already
Okay,
actually in the implementation phase.
Lydia.
It's hard for me to say, but maybe we're entering the slope of enlightenment where people are getting a realistic expectation of what we're talking about.
Mark?
I would agree that we're sort of we're over the hype now. And I would say that we're there because so many aspects, I think, are now commoditized. Right? So Fair Data Point is now download it, press a button, and it installs. The Roche solution, right, commoditized. So we've managed to make it possible for people to do fair, and now they're able to see, how far did that get me? Right? Did it get me to the point where the machine knows what I want? No, it really didn't.
Mhm.
Right? And so now we're going back down to realistically, what are we achieving with fair? And I think that we keep pushing, and we're going to get better, but we had to get over that initial, if this didn't happen, I was thinking as I was sitting during the last talk, that we've turned the impossible into the difficult. And that's an achievement, right?
Yeah, well, make fair
So-
easy was a goal. Eh?
Yeah.
One of the things that was a hype term during the conference 2 weeks ago was Carol Goebel came up with the term underwear instead of professor wear. So
Oh,
she
that's
said
Robert
it
Stevens
should
10
go
years earlier.
underneath. So more and more it should become easy for people to do fair. But then again, a lot of people, let me go back to the Gartner cycle. I just read a very interesting article a few weeks ago that it's a total myth. It doesn't happen. I mean, but anyway, let's not go there. I think it is reflected on this convergence versus technological diversification. So you get this new bright idea. There's nothing wrong with the idea. Everybody jumps on it, makes their own solution. Then you get disappointment because actually it's not really converging to what we wanted. Then it starts converging and then it booms. There's almost this hype cycle there reflected, but that is the real mechanism behind it, I think. And we are going to the point, as Mark said, where more and more standard solutions come. But one of the other disappointments is that people have made a lot of data fair that were nonsense to make fair. So I always tell people, don't try to make all your legacy data fair. Only make data fair the first time you want to feed them to machines. You don't need to make all data fair. And then they turn against fair by saying, oh, it's far too expensive, far too difficult. And if you make data fair, while you do not have an actual use case where you need the machine to help you to analyze the data, then you will be very disappointed because what did I gain here? Nothing.
Mhm.
So it's all about the fact that we're entering a phase in science where machines are our major research assistants. So data should be ready. That's why now people call it fully AI ready data fair. And that is only when you want to use machines, then it makes sense to make your data fair. If not, why would you do it?
So the next question is, should the funding organizations tell you which metadata standard you should apply to? Or should these really not touch this at all?
Well, I can
I
give
think-
you the example of Zon en Wee here in the Netherlands. They do not only ask a proper, fair, compliant data stewardship plan for you as a condition to get your funding, but we are now very seriously discussing with them to also make sure that you can prove that you have the data stewards to execute the plan. And they will evaluate, coming back to evaluators, whether you actually did it. And in the Netherlands, we have this nice funding system where the last 10% of your installment you only get when you submit your final report. So they have a stick to say, you know, you don't get your last 10% unless you actually do it. But then they have to also make it easy for people. So Zon en Wee is now doing a lot of work to, if they do a call for a particular topic like dementia or AMR, they would bring together people from the field before they even do the call, make a fair implementation profile, say these are the good metadata for machine workshop, and then they say you can do it all the way you want if you use our preconceived stuff, which is a lot easier. You just press the green button, then you don't have to answer question 12 to 24 that gives you a headache, but then you commit to do it the way the funder wants. But it is not an absolute prerequisite because, you know, if you want to do it in another way, as long as you're fair, it should be okay. But it's a lot more difficult to prove.
There was a, sorry, go ahead.
But how did you educate the funding agencies to be actually able to evaluate it? Because there comes a project on dementia, the next one is in environmental science. So I think this is really a huge challenge because I think we have even too little people in the country to do the work itself. So how do we get the funding agencies?
Well, okay, Mark wants to say
So
something.
that was a perfect lead-in. So there's a project that had a kickoff meeting 2 weeks ago called OS Trails. It's an EOSC infrastructure to make machine actionable data management plans. So the idea would be that the funding agency installs your data management plan and pushes a button, and it goes out and says, yeah, they did that, yeah, they did that, yeah, no, they didn't do that.
Yeah.
And so that's how we imagine it will be solved, is that the data steward will not have to do the evaluation themselves. It will be objective and automated.
And it came also to a very strong point that came out last week, was that one of the most inhibitory factors is that most funders still do not put enough funds into training data stewards. Because the big mistake that was made in EOSC, in my view, and you know, I was involved in the beginning, is that they still think the researcher, the bench researcher, is their final customer. And I said in Vienna after 5 years of EOSC, no, compare it to Uber. You know, the passenger is the final customer, but they don't know how the car works. They just want a simple app to get a chauffeur that brings them from A to B. And I would compare the data steward with the chauffeur or the driver of the car. Again, doesn't necessarily know how to take the car apart, but can drive much better than the scientist. So if you try to make everything understandable for bench scientists, you will not go anywhere. We need 5% of every research grant to go into proper data stewardship, including training. And on every 20 data spitters in a modern research group, you should have one professional data steward. This is the only way to get it going.
Okay, so we have a question for the audience, and that is, what is your latest Wikidata edit? And we'll go me, Lydia, Mark, Sabine, and then Barend. So mine was 4 weeks ago, and that was adding some Sparkle endpoints to Wikidata, which were missing to data sources. Lydia.
I think one of my latest edits was reverting some vandalism, unfortunately.
I have never made one. I'm anti-Wikidata.
I also have never made one.
I'm not allowed to. My people know that whenever I touch anything software level or database level, I destroy it. So I can only
And I
talk.
would encourage some of you to edit Wikidata and others not so much.
From the panel, what would you expect from the Software HLS participants to make things more fair?
From the participants here?
Yeah. What do you want us to do?
I think going out in the world and spread the word, because I think we are still a too small community. And as you say, in Switzerland, most probably we not even have that data steward. I think I have not seen in any of our project one person which I could give that role. And I think this is really where we need to spread the word and get that to the right
Well,
people.
I would say become better marketeers. I am a biologist by training. I switched to data science in 2000, and data scientists are the worst marketeers ever, you know? So they don't even talk to each other, let alone to the outside world. So I think that this meeting is very important. You should become a proud new group of professionals. And one of the most frustrating things also in the university here is that we finally now have a recognized data stewardship profession. And then the deans came together and they said, oh, this is support personnel. So we can put them in scale 10 or so, which is a ridiculous salary, you know? So I fight already for years against this idea that data stewards are support personnel. They are part and parcel of a modern research group and a crucial professional, new profession. And like Autumn is now this organization of TTOs and technology transfer officers. And this is of course Dutch, but the Dutch people understand when they just came up, they put misshapen biologists here to, you become technology transfer officer. So we call them toch tegenvallende onderzoekers, which means, you know, as TTO. So it was like not recognized as a profession. Now, every university has an official TTO, and these are highly trained professionals, and they help us to commercialize things and so on. So data stewards should form their own, and you're not all data stewards, also data scientists, but there's a big difference. Data stewards should have their own proud professional group. And the good news is that in the last 3 projects that I was involved in, and one has is really big, the Human Immunome project, they want to raise 8 billion euros. When I told the CEO that that would mean 50 million for every billion he raises for data around the world, he didn't even blink. He said, yeah, sure, no problem. That's the 5% rule that came up out of nowhere. But and here, Marco, in the LCCO, and when the Leiden Computational Oncology Initiative, you know, we told them they got 6.4 million from the university, that there should be 3 data stewards, and we got 600,000 for data stewardship. Of course, they tried to diminish it later, but that was 10%. So I think that would have been impossible 5 years ago. So there is a change, and that's why I believe we are in this convergence phase. We are starting to get the attractor and the converger. I don't like this hype cycle thing, but I think we are over the hype that causes technological diversification, and now we are entering the convergence phase.
So a question from the audience is, let's imagine an ideal world where all the data is fair and we finished, everything is fair. What would happen next?
AI would become more clever than we are. And according to Harari, that humanism would then determine that they have the right to determine what's good and bad, because we take that right now because we think we are the most clever algorithms. So I think the first decision they would make is to get rid of Homo sapiens.
Okay, with that depressing thought.
I thought I was controversial. So I'm going to temper that a little bit.
Just a little bit.
So, I mean, we've always said, Barend, that fair is a continuum. So I would say you are never going to be fair. Just keep going, keep going. Because when we first started building the fair evaluation system and the metrics and the tests, I made the claim. I said, as soon as you get 100%, I'm going to make harder tests. And so I think that I would never worry about that. We just keep getting better and better and better. And hopefully the agents will get better and better along with us.
But on the other hand, one of the other conclusions we made 2 weeks ago is that we have been totally lousy on publishing the success stories. And a lot of people said, so, okay, show me where FAIR made a real difference. Well, SPHN is one example. But if you think about the swarm learning paper, they didn't even mention FAIR. And they came here, the Germans, 2 weeks ago. They said, yeah, we are actually working with FAIR data stations and FAIR data. We just didn't call it FAIR. So that's the other side of the coin. Some people do FAIR and they don't even mention the term, which is good in a way, because that's an underwear thing. So there is a lot of success stories, even in our own group. Let's say the whole thing Rajaram did with transcription start sites versus mutations in LOVD. That was published in some, little conference here, yeah. And nobody reads that. Who reads SWOT for HLS in the biology? Eh? Of course, you guys think, wow, this is... So for IEEE is the highest achievable thing for data scientists. None of the doctors ever reads that here. So we have to promote the success stories of FAIR much more vigorously because people don't see the value.
So Sabine, as a person who is set as a leader in a group which is success in FAIR, although you've told me very often, because you're so close to the milestone, you don't see the progress you make every day. And people are outside, see a presentation once a year and think like, oh my God, how did you manage to do that in just 1 year? Have a very different perspective. So how do you feel about this?
Yeah, I think we have seen it also today. I think the gap between what medical people and how medical research is done, where we still used to having a study nurse like copying data from one system to another. And then I think we also heard before the variable name is the blood pressure 24 hours after admission. If this is not the case, and if he came by the ambulance, then take the first blood pressure measured within 3 days. And to get that change to say, this is not, as how to model that. And I think you missed me out on the first one, which is the FAIR principle to be the hardest to achieve. And I think for us, it's the language of knowledge representation, because clinicians think this is my language of knowledge representation. They say, yes, for a human, but a machine does not really understand such a kind of term. And there is actually, when you start to model that one, it actually is already quite a complex model. It has like at least 4 or 5 attributes to it. And if people are like, oh my God, is that complicated? I just like my nice variable name. And I think
but this relates to what Mark said, that people sometimes mix up data and metadata. And we have a beautiful example. I won't mention names now, but it was a hospital not so far from here, another academic hospital. And they sent us their COVID data in the COVID epidemic. And believe it or not, it was an Excel sheet, which is sin number 1. Then in column 108, it didn't fit on my large screen. In column 108, it said naar huis, gone home in Dutch. But we also use that term for dying. You went to your eternal home. So it's totally ambiguous. And there was no header on the column. And when we confronted the ICU doctor there, a very famous guy, our Fauci, why do you put naar huis there? Why don't you use an ICD-10 or 11 code for discharge from the hospital? He literally took his fountain pen from his white coat and said, ICD-10, well, what the heck? They have no idea, of course. But then we said to him, what you can do in a FAIR data station that Luis is now developing on FAIR data point with access control and everything. We joked with him, we had a bottle of wine on the table saying, we could say in machine readable metadata, thou art now entering Rotterdam station. Oh, sorry, now I say Rotterdam. But anyway, you now enter Rotterdam station. And there are still idiots who say naar huis in column 108. It means discharge from the hospital. So you can make data machine actionable as long as they make the same mistake consistently using Excel and putting it always in column 108 with the same term. Then you can say, this actually means discharge from the hospital. And the machine starts to understand this thing. And as Mark also said before, you could then turn this into a FAIR CSV file trivially by machines by just replacing naar huis everywhere for ICD-10 in the first case. But again, the conceptual model that people make very complicated ways of referring to things is hampering. And the people that have the electronic health records that have us in a deadly embrace and make a lot of money by their own crap, they told us, oh, it's impossible. Because in Leiden, you say, are you a smoker or not? In Rotterdam, they say, how many cigarettes per day do you smoke? We cannot. I said, well, just upload it in FAIR. We will tell smart machines that if you smoke 3 cigarettes a day, you're probably a smoker, okay? We can handle those kind of things. But so they sometimes really make it more difficult than it is. But indeed, getting a doctor out of this crazy language use and the jargon is not an easy thing.
Do you mind if I say something? Because I've been really struck listening to Barend. Because you and I, and actually most of the people in the room, we're really privileged because we're surrounded by really smart, fair people. Right? The average botanist is not. Right? So you can talk about personal health training and building stations, and the average botanist cannot. And yet they're expected to be fair by the funding agencies. How fair can they be? They can be as fair as the repository where they upload their data. So I am as fair as Zenodo. I am as fair as Figshare. That's as fair as they can be. Right? And they're just exactly the same as we are. We're privileged,
Yeah,
right? And so I mean, it's a little bit unfair at the moment, lowercase fair.
But this is maybe a thing that is very important to say also to the funders. Again, came out of the meeting, the funders were there, saying the fact that the funders use this stick without being responsible and saying what is reasonable to ask has really damaged the implementation of FAIR and created fake FAIR. We have to only ask things that are reasonable from our funders, and they will have a follow-up meeting exactly on this point. So I totally agree.
Because I think we had a similar thing when we asked now researchers about what is important when building these repositories, what they want to search for when we're using the data. Like a quite common answer was, I need this accession number because the publisher wants it, otherwise I cannot get my paper published. And then it's like, yeah, sorry. Then we should not do it, because just to having a data graveyard, just to get the IDs, yeah, what's the reason? And that's really frustrating if you...
So the next question is from the audience is, how does an institution go from 0% data storage to 5%? And I'm going to turn it around a little bit to Lydia. It's like, how do you go from 0 to 100% Wikimedia to Wikipedia, Wikipedia to Wikidata, as an opener?
It hasn't been easy. So depending on the type of data we're talking about, I think one thing as I would recommend coming from Wikimedia is to have a look at Wikibase, and especially Wikibase Cloud. So Wikibase is the software that's running on that Wikidata is running on, and it's open source. You can run it to run your own system. And we even now offer Wikibase Cloud, where we basically host a Wikibase for you, where you can open up your data in the same way as Wikidata does it. And now this is not the right thing for all kinds of data, but I would recommend people have a look and see if that gets them from 0 to 5% at least already.
Well, Egon put a question in the LinkedIn before saying, why is Wikidata still the most fair resource? I think that's the right way to phrase it. Have you ever run an evaluator on Wikidata? And how does it
That's
score?
the reason for my answer.
Okay.
So it was wow. I'm done.
Yeah. So I also have an evaluator, and I thought it was pretty fair, but you know, metadata requirements change. So we had a question from, and that is, how do we make PhD theses more fair? And also, I would say, can we have fair grant numbers?
Well, maybe we just had a meeting with the hogeschool and we told them, well, why don't you scratch out this whole session on how to write a scientific paper? LLM will do that for you. So what we show now increasingly is if you feed good LLMs with a knowledge graph first, then it writes a better paper than you will ever be able to do yourself, including me. I mean, I'm now writing the report for this Lorentz conference. We made a knowledge graph first. I have a slide on it, but we don't have to show it. And yesterday we fed that to, a mediocre LLM, and it wrote already a better paper than I could ever do that. So what we have said years ago already, the APIN paper, the Academic Publishers Implementation Network, is you should take your major claims and put them in machine readable format like nano publications, trivials with provenance in a knowledge graph, and then creating text in any language from that is trivial by now. So that is a skill that modern students don't even have to learn anymore. No, they better train them in knowledge graphs to really present very precisely what they mean, and then create the text for the thesis by some LLM type technology, because that is trivial. And one of the things that is so nice about these texts that come out is that, first of all, machines will be able to understand the thesis because they go to the nano publication or the knowledge graph and not to the text. But even the text is much better, because what you see in scientific papers or thesis nowadays is that we have been taught at high school to not use the same term for the same concept all the time. Humans are prone to use synonyms all the time. That makes it so much more lively and so much more difficult for machines to understand. Why would you have all these synonyms all the time? But we are actually taught to do that, to make better text. Scientific text should be as precise as possible. No prosa, no poetry, you know? You just want to convey a very precise scientific claim. So we say now to publishers who are also at the meeting, make all new claims in every new paper also as nano publications. And if you cannot present your claim as a triple or a graph with provenance, it's not a claim. And then machines will be able to understand the paper, and we will send this to reviewers straight away based on the concepts in the triples rather than on the text. You get much better review, much faster review. So FAIR can turn the entire publication system upside down, which again is a 30 billion market and will be a lot of resistance against those changes. But thesis of the future should be completely different from today, in my view.
Where would you put that on the hype side?
Well, I don't put anything on the hype cycle because I don't believe in it, but I think this is going to be, I mean, remember the first time that calculators came, my father was devastated, said, oh, nobody will be able to calculate by head anymore. So what? Why would you? You know? So now this is the same story. And Einstein always said when people asked him, why didn't you know that you were so clever? Why don't you know this? He said, why would I keep anything in my brain that I can look up? So if we are writing prosa is not what a scientist should do. They should convey knowledge, which is much better done by knowledge graphs and accompanying text than the other way around. And that's, you know, should have brought a number of things. Maybe Louise has them. We have even printed coasters for the meeting to put under your glass. On the one hand, the knowledge graph of the FAIR paper. On the other side of the same coaster was the human readable text created by LLM, and it's perfect. And everyone got one to take home. And I use them for teaching all the time now, saying, you know, work with knowledge graphs and use LLMs to create human readable output from the knowledge graph.
This is the question. When is data data and when is data metadata? I always use the term, there is no meta, there is merit. I needed that data. Lydia, what's your opinion on what data would you really have liked and is missing?
Oh my God, so much. I want, for Wikidata specifically, I want so much more references for all the data we already have, right? Like newspaper articles, scientific papers, what have you. But I think for Wikidata, there are at least two ways you can look at metadata for it. One, I would say, is we have entries about scientific papers that describe the scientific paper, like who wrote it, where was it published, and so on, what's the topic. So that's definitely some type of metadata that we deal with. But then we also have data about our entries, like who edited it last, when it was created, and so on. And for Wikidata, I think the former is more important, but the whole project couldn't work without the latter, if that helps.
Sabine,
in between. I'm putting her on the spot.
Yeah, I think for the medical side, there's of course, depending on which domain you are, you can every time have more specific data on the patient, more precise measurements. But what we see now is really, especially when working with routine data, is really we need to better understand where this data is coming from, how it was manipulated. So I think for us at the moment, it's really about the data provenance. So, and this is something where actually I'm fighting at the moment a lot of fights because people don't understand in the community the importance. They just say, yeah, but I have that SNOMED code and I have this other SNOMED code. And the fact that you may want to understand from which original system was it coming, from the clinical information system, was it coming from the oncology system, this is really something which people not yet see, and I think which is a very important part.
Yeah, and I remember 10 years ago, I wrote on the blackboard in the Lorentz conference, you probably remember, oh, when we deal with machines, metadata are no stupid biologists. We don't need metadata. And I was killed by Michelle and by Mark and others said, what? And well, of course, there is a blur. What is data about data? You describe another fair digital object, whatever. But one of the reasons I learned how important it is to separate your metadata, also in the fair digital object architecture, from your actual data is, for example, that the metadata provenance, but also there could be the license on the data. Am I allowed to see the data in the first place? I want to see that in metadata. The size of the data set. If I press download and it appears to be a petabyte, better know that from the metadata. So of course there is this gray area. What is data? What is metadata? That's why in the article we introduced this term metadata. So things that account both for the data and for the metadata. But I think for me, metadata are data about data or about another digital object that describe it so well that I understand it. And that also comes back to this naar huis thing. You can make the data in this repository machine actionable by adding enough instructions in the rich metadata.
I think Lydia wants to respond because I see her nodding actively. Oh, then it's Mark.
So Barend is almost right.
Which is rare.
So what I'm coming from the perspective of someone who's had to teach a machine how to evaluate the degree of fairness of a repository or a digital object. And so you have to make very, very unambiguous decisions about what is metadata and what is data. Almost everything is metadata. Clinical record is about you.
Yeah.
Right. So it's metadata. So it's metadata all the way down. And I think we have very little data. And if you treat it as metadata all the way down, then it solves a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I got the different opposite perspective. It's all data. There is no meta.
No, but George Strong said that in the Internet of Fair Data and Services, as he calls it, there will be a lot more metadata than data. That's exactly what he said. And it all depends on your definition of what you call metadata. But if metadata are something that describes another digital object or a physical object,
thing.
Like
Or thing.
But I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, you could say that metadata is a form of data. That's sure.
Yes.
So you could also argue that everything is data, but some by their nature are metadata because they describe something else.
Metadata is about.
So the question from the audience is, what are the tasks of data stewards? Do they need to know the domain, ontologies and tools for verification? Do they need to contribute building standards?
Well, for me, I always say in the LUMC and the university, if I get a data steward in my group that glazes over when I say the word gene, they're useless. But they do not need to understand the domain completely, but they need enough understanding to not glaze over when I say gene in a genetics department. So we work with embedded data stewards that are actually part of the research group. And some data stewards like Christina and others, they are still very knowledgeable about their domain, but they function at a higher level, like the Central Data Stewardship Competence Center, you know, and they know everything about LZ issues and that you don't necessarily need to know in the domain itself. So there's not one kind of data steward, in my view. Data stewards can be embedded and maybe even have been trained as biologists first and then became a data steward. They're certainly different from data scientists. Data scientists and bioinformaticians are the worst data stewards in the world. They accept oh, the data should be here, and they make a new algorithm and a workflow for every single thing you ask them, and they never version it, so they destroy reproducibility. I think the worst is a data scientist as a data steward. You need people that know a little bit about the domain and really are prepared to take care of data rather than doing fancy stuff with them necessarily.
So as enablers, data stewards should be enablers of data reuse.
Yeah, but not support personnel. Please never accept that people call you support personnel when you're a data steward. I think it is an absolutely critical function in a modern research group. It should have the same salary as a professor. Come on. And I'm fighting for this for years now, since 2013, and it still has not resulted in higher than, what is it, Marco? We can tell them now 10, scale 10 or something, a ridiculously low salary. Yeah. So we need to get a proud profession again, and very good training. There are more and more official trainings. There is a certified, accredited data stewardship training starting at the hogeschool right here, first in the Netherlands. You will get an official diploma as a data steward with a fair certificate.
Throw just a bit of fire, gasoline on the fire. I would say that deans are support personnel, and these seem to be paid quite well.
And that's one of the things, I say the machine knows what I mean, and Carol Goebel said recently, it all fails unless the dean knows what you mean.
Yeah. So follow-up question from the audience is, how would you separate data stewards from knowledge stewards?
Well, I think every scientist should feel responsible for knowledge, the knowledge they create, so they should be knowledge stewards. That doesn't mean they're necessarily data stewards. So data stewards really deal with the data and the workflows and the fair, underlying technology. While every scientist should be a knowledge steward, because science is all about creating and communicating knowledge. So, but that doesn't mean every knowledge steward is a data steward. That's a specialism. That would be my take.
Which leads to another follow-up question, and that is, how do you ensure that data stewards get proper acknowledgement in the scientific process? And could this be compared to research software engineers, who also are often struggling comparatively to their commercial software engineers in many ways?
Well, here you see a very big difference between the fields, and that's one of the silos. As I said, IEEE is the highest achievable thing maybe in data science, but nobody ever reached that in medicine or biology. In biology, your authorship, first author, last author, second author, is all extremely important. So the worst thing you can do is put your data stewards in the acknowledgement. They should be a full-blown author of the article if they have contributed to it. So at least in that side of the story where authorship matters and even the position of the author matters, they get the same recognition as the experimentalist. That is extremely important. And as data stewards, forget that you only publish in the IEEE and conferences that nobody ever reads. Go and publish in Nature and Science together with the content specialists.
I don't want to monopolize, but I would go one step farther. It's like we have journals that publish data. So the data steward is first author on a scientific data publication.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it all comes back to this, become a proud professional, not some, mediocre support personnel stuff.
Sabine? No?
Yeah.
So, as we're talking about the adoption cycle, how can we make it rewarding, required, and possible add more infrastructure and tools normal? Where are we in this in this cycle respect to fair? Is there anything we should be changing here? What's something that you can encourage audience to engage in?
Sorry, I don't get the question completely. What is the...
It's more like what kind of tools, or at least this is how I interpret the question, what kind of tools, what kind of processes should we implement and make easier for FAIR to rise to the next level?
I think Barend said something really important right at the beginning, and that's expectation management. Like, you've got to make sure that you're aiming for the degree of fairness that you need and that is expected of you, not. And that's first, and then we think about tools.
And I think for this audience, you would say, make the tools for your audience, because that really means, I think, an old funny story of one of our early programmers in the MBIC times was when Rob Hoofd asked him, did you make this for engineers or for biologists, this tool? And he became world famous by saying, no, not for biologists. The user should have some knowledge. So he considered that's where the term stupid biologist came from, that is always placed on me. I act as the stupid biologist. I don't have to understand these tools, as long as I have people that do, okay? But the funders are very important here, and they're probably not represented in the room. I have this sin number 6 in the 7 capital sins in open science, is everybody wants to fund rocket science. Nobody wants to fund the rocket launcher. Okay, so there should be proper funding for research infrastructure that allows machine assisted science. And it's not there. It's simply not there. And nobody wants to invest in it. And it can be done in the 5%.
I'm looking into the audience, I see Katie. embedding semantics into existing tools.
Yeah.
Semantics by stealth. Right? And
Yeah.
there we are. And that was what, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think also we need
More,
to get
yeah.
the sustainability into this funding, because of course, if you go with the normal funding cycles of 4 years and you have no not secured continuation, it's really hard, because it's very easy to publish a tool, write a cool paper, but then also to maintain and to do all the updates. It does not bring you any scientific recognition anymore, but it is very important, especially when communities rely on it. And I think this is really
Coming back to the Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics, we struggled with Ron Apple and Amos Barlock years ago, even in Elixir, and we said that even a Uniprot level tool that nobody would ever doubt is extremely important for biology. They go, not anymore maybe, but for a long time, they went through a near-death experience every 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to compete with people that promised 20 Nature papers, you know? So NIH then came in and gave a lot of money, and there was a lot of troubles coming from that. But before Uniprot, Swissprot became Uniprot, we remember that they charged industry for Uniprot, and they happily paid. And then NIH said, oh, it should be free. Well, Christine Chichester came to work for me after that, and she wrote letters to industry based on the NIH grant that they didn't have to pay anymore. And she told me that some of them still kept paying. Didn't even read the letter. Yeah, it was about this 125,000 per year. So there is a market for these things. They can be sustainable. But if the public sector prevents us from doing this commercially, and then they don't fund it, you go through this near-death experience every 4 years, even by a portal.
Yes. So I can add a little bit to this as a representative of Uniprot today. So it's changed from every 4 years to every 5 years. The reason why I was nodding like no, not everybody was happy to pay. One of the things was pharma came together and said, well, why can't we put this bill from our budget into the NIH budget? And then it became like, do we then keep being on the commercial side, or do we grab the NIH budget to do the same what we already were doing, instead of then have a public competitor which will be funded and we will be paid? So it's a bit of an awkward story, that one.
Well, but I agree, but I think that one of the best things Elixir did, in my view, was to set up this concept of core resources, and Uniprot is one of them. So if you are creating a critical mass like in an S3 or like Elixir and others, and they collectively say, if Uniprot is down, biology stops, you know, this is a core resource. It has to be up and running 24/7, blah, blah. Okay, who's going to pay for that? And it is, as Ron Apple published, a minuscule part of research investment is enough to keep this infrastructure going. It's like less than 1% or so. So, but if funders say, no, NIH, we are not funding this stuff. We fund rocket science. No rocket launchers. Well, then your rockets are useless.
Another question. What is the relationship of FAIR in respect to privacy, compliance, security, that are often the primary responsibilities of the data management offices? And I think this is a question that Sabine lives in or works to separate those things.
Yeah, as for me, they are completely different things, let's say, because I think we have the privacy preserving technologies on the one side and the access control. And actually, what I always say for us, it's like we can be also fair within the secure environment. So what we look into SPGen, we want to have fair data, but it is fair within this box, what we call a kind of a secure, trusted research environment for actually at the moment that consortia, because that consortia has the legal agreements to access the data. And I think here it's really on which level are we looking for. And I think this is the kind of
Yeah, totally. And like equality, fair as such, of course, the aids have well-defined conditions. The accessibility conditions should be, if you want to be machine actionable, should also be machine actionable. But maybe good to mention that the last 5 lectures I gave had the same title, which is Stop Data Sharing. And people say, oh, yeah, data visiting. And we are now having a full team of LZ people, ethical people and lawyers looking in HealthRI at the difference between shipping data outside their safe environment to somewhere else where you lose control, and algorithms coming, asking a legitimate question that is not violating the consent and the access control of the data. The data stay in your station, and we just told me this morning that in their application of the station HealthRI now, there is always this final step that you decide in the station. You have the results, that's what you share with the algorithm, but you have a final check whether there is nothing wrong there. So there's many steps that you can preserve privacy by data visiting. And in this big project that I'm just talking about, the Human Immunome Project, you want to collect genomics up to exposomics and behavioral data from everyone in the world, possibly, you know? And you don't think the Chinese are going to send their genomics data to the US at the moment. So the only way to run a project like this and create the AI model of the human immunome, which is their huge moonshot, is to visit the data. And that's why, to shock people, my title is now Stop Data Sharing. Because if you say data sharing, people think I share my data with someone else and I actually send them away. Of course, data visiting is a way of data sharing, but I like to put people on the wrong leg first.
What's your experience with hospital IT? People saying, oh, we're not going to run a server here.
Okay, in HealthRI, that's now a done deal. That's what's going to happen. But of course, smaller hospitals don't do that. And we have Rodan Africa, where there is 90 hospitals already doing it this way. But they decide, some of these hospitals, I always say, have 3 iPads. So they cannot receive trains or drones or whatever. So they say, okay, we put our stuff in a central station. That's fine, but that's what we trust. So you put your data in a trusted fair data station. All the European data spaces essentially are fair data stations if they are implemented well. And then you have enough CPUs and cores there to run the actual algorithms locally.
But I think just a nice anecdote for that one, as you were saying, there's always data which is shared. And actually, when I was first discussing with one of our lawyers about the contract for such a data visiting process, it was like, but Sabine, there is data shared. And I'm like, no, the data stays where it is. But Sabine, you were saying you send something back actually to the Netherlands. I'm like, no, we are not sending data to the Netherlands.
Only results.
And then actually exactly that. I was like, it's result data. So you're like, okay, Sabine, we can put result data in that contract to make you happy. But it is data which you share. Do we agree on that? And I think this is really a very interesting one to also say, how are we classifying that data which is shared? Who takes the responsibility? As you say, you can at the end look at it, but who takes the responsibility, sees, is there still any sensitive things in that data? And I think that's really
Yeah, and it is
It's
also
very
difficult to explain to ethical people, but we have a very good one here at LUMC, and I told her, if Roche comes and they simply want to know whether a side effect of their drug or their vaccine is frequent in the Netherlands, that's impossible now. All the doors close. But if the HealthRI approved algorithm, where they only put the drug and the side effect as a parameter, it's an approved algorithm that is safe and, and the thing goes around to all the UMCs in the Netherlands, it will be able to answer that question in a few minutes. And Roche told us that will save us hundreds of thousands of dollars per run. So please set it up. And the answer is 8. Is that data? 8 people got the drug and got the side effect. That's what they want to know.
I'm curious, the chair,
Yeah.
which being from where you're from, with really strict rules, do you think data visiting is a practical solution in your environment?
I think so, but it's not an easy solution because here I will need to validate the algorithm because looking at it as a security, it'll be like if you ask enough questions, you'll copy all the data anyway. So it would just be an inefficient copy. So you will have to be very, very vigilant about how often are trains visiting. And isn't that a bit suspicious that you visit every 15 nanoseconds? And why are you doing that? And this is what has, of course, happened quite often with these projects like the encryption standards, where it's like self-encrypting and you can ask the data. But if you just keep on asking enough and enough and enough, you'll finally break it because you'll ask all the possible persons for the answers, and it will just
Even
fail.
the beacons are not safe. We have already shown that,
Mhm.
but that is okay because what we are now discussing here in the Netherlands is that there is a power log in the questions you ask. I think the first question is how many patients have this disease. That's already unanswerable for the pharma. The second one is side effects. Very simple algorithm. Then the next one we are working on is for Eurotransplant. Match the profile of the donor with the recipients. And that can be distributed in 8 countries where Eurotransplant works. Well, why do we have the helicopter landing place here? We cannot wait until ethical committees say, let's see whether we can do this match. No, that should be minutes. So you could have a garage or remise, as we say, with HealthRI, SPHN, whatever, approved algorithms with relatively straightforward, simple and legitimate questions like side effects. And if you only change the parameters and the algorithm is approved, it should get green light in all the hospitals that are participating. And that will be 90% of your questions.
So you said it and you said it, and that is approved.
Yeah.
And
Certified.
so in this wasn't through EJP, but this was through the activities of my company working with the Duchenne community, is that we were building visiting stations effectively, which answered, for example, key performance indicators as a statistic, 25%. Right.
That's what you share.
Right. And but I said, as a company representative, I don't want to take the responsibility of asking a question over your data that has not been approved. And so we set up a governance process, including patients, including FAIR experts, including clinical experts, including ethical experts, who looked at the query and said, that is acceptable. They looked at the outputs and said, we need a little bit more anonymization, right? Could you go back and rewrite it? But we set up a process for doing exactly that. It's like it's not just HealthRI, right? We have to include the people whose data is being used.
Now in EDS,
yeah,
there is this legal requirement in Europe to have your national access data body. Yeah? So you basically could, and HealthRI can do that for health, SPHN for health in Switzerland maybe, but you need a trusted party that has given this algorithm said the question is legitimate.
Yes.
There is no worms inside, whatever, and the output is the sort of stuff you can share. And if HealthRI in the Netherlands or SPHN or any health access data access body could say this is a set of approved algorithms, and the pharma, whoever needs to do the query, can only change parameters, you know. But imagine how that would change. We had the AstraZeneca problem here in the Netherlands with the vaccine, which was a side effect. Well, it took us months to actually find out it was likely not a side effect. And if anything, it was the adenovirus and not the spike protein. That has costed millions. Well, if we would have such an algorithm saying, hey, how many people got deep vein thrombosis, young women, and what is their characteristics? And we saw the pattern that we found out. I won't go into it. It's a bit, ambiguous. But let's say that could have been solved in this way in a matter of 1 day. And now it took 3 months. And it cost AstraZeneca a fortune. And it costed some deaths here in the Netherlands, for sure.
You used another word that triggered me because I liked it, and that is legitimate.
Mhm.
So some questions are not legitimate.
No.
They're accurate, but not legitimate.
Exactly. They
And-
could be racist or whatever.
Exactly.
They need to be ethical.
A perfectly correctly clear, with anonymous output, still illegitimate question.
And that is what, so the meeting was the road to fair and equitable science. It was a full day on equitable access. What does it mean for funders, for that? And the outcome was, if the question is legitimate and is not violating the access control, the consent and everything, it should not make a difference who asks the question, whether it's an African scientist or Roche. But first you need to know the question is legitimate, it doesn't violate consent levels, and the output is also ethical.
Then you
And
can
that
make
can
it
be
public.
checked.
Then you can make it public.
Yeah.
That was what the EuroMD decided, that
Yeah.
as long as it's gone through this governance process, it's public.
Exactly.
So coming back to questions from the audience, and this is one I like from Jane Lomax, from the data steward role. Industry often struggles to recruit people with a skill profile, what it looks like and how to find them. Any ideas on how to address this? And I would almost say to data stewards, get better at providing your personal data to companies that want to hire you. But what's the
No.
opinion of the panel?
Little of
All
them.
my data stewards go to industry. They pay double. Come on. The difficulty is much more on the academic side. Of course, there are far too few data stewards. You need to train 500,000 in Europe alone. But every single data steward, well, one still is with us, but they finally give up and they go to industry. So yes, industry has difficulties to get them because there are far too little, too few, but we have no way to keep them once we train them because they are in scale 10.
Lydia, as a Wikidata person, you might also have the difficulty of retraining highly trained IT staff. How do you deal with it?
Wikidata is a fairly complex system indeed, and getting developers in for that is a struggle, especially at a nonprofit salary. So can very much relate. But I think we highlight obviously the benefits of working on Wikidata on something that makes a difference in the world. And I think one thing that has worked well for us in the past is recruiting from the Wikidata community. So from the editor community, from people building applications on top of Wikidata, because they are already excited about that. They already have a sense of what it means to maintain that data, what it means to use that data, and so on. So that has been very helpful, even if not always easy.
Sabine, I know that you've in past have also had issues hiring people that you wanted. So
Yeah, I think there's way too little people with that skill set on the market. So I think also here, getting the people from connections from the community is really also here the thing which was making me successful. But yeah, I think we need to invest much more into the education. And here, I think what I see a lot, I'm involved in all the certificate of advanced studies at different Swiss university now, teaching a bit about our approaches, about knowledge graphs. But there is, I think, only 2 courses on master levels which talks about RDFs and knowledge graphs in whole Switzerland. And then it's actually in the informatics sector. So these people go to Google in Zurich at ETH. That's
Well, a little plug for the Netherlands, maybe. We have now openscience.nl, which used to be the Netherlands program Open Science. They got 200 million, and a very serious part of that will go to data stewardship training. But other countries have to do the same thing. And that sounds like a lot of money, maybe, but it's 20 million per year. They will give part of that money to research performing organizations with the label train data stewards, you know. And I'm in one of the advisory boards. I think that is going to make a big difference. But it took us almost 10 years to get from the first announcement to NWO that we needed data stewards, it was 2013, to 2023 to get that program. It took 10 years to convince the deans and the funders to make serious investment into data stewardship training. So it's not easy.
I have a question for the gentleman who's about to retire. Do you think that we're fishing in the wrong pond? It's like I've been running now a fair master's level course for 2 years in the computational biology program. They're not going to go on and be data stewards. I think we're targeting the wrong people.
You remind me of the very first course we gave on data stewardship in 2016 from Leru. You know, they sent their top 2 students, so there were 50 students, and they were not computational biologists, or even they were just biologists or whatever. And Rob Hoofd said at the start of the meeting, 2016, at the end of this meeting, you're not a data steward, you will be consciously incompetent. So you know that you need a data steward, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And 2 of the people during the course that were potential Nobel Prize winners, the best students of the best universities in Europe, decided to become a data steward. So maybe it's coming back to also this question, do they need content knowledge? You know, I don't want some data scientist that looks the other way when I say gene. So we need maybe to fish in different ponds and get people from biology or any other
Or
area
library science.
and train them as data stewards. So they are not the data scientists that make a new algorithm for everything you ask.
So, and maybe we should say we should stop fishing and we should start farming, and grow our own fish.
Cultivating fish.
That's it.
I am what to call data stewards of fish, but I
It's a
think
big fish to catch.
yeah, but I think also one of the most important skill is really being that translator. So being able, as you say, you don't need to be a full domain expert, but you need to be able to talk to the biologist, you need to be able to take to the medical person, and to be able to talk to the legal person at the same time. Everyone has their completely own vocabulary, their slang. And I think it's really also about being able to quickly get into these slangs and then translate it for the other, because I think that's what I've seen also in our role as the data coordination center the most, is like that the IT can just not talk to the clinicians. You can put them for 4 hours in the same room, but they will not understand each other. They need a translator. And I think this is really also a quite important
the
skill.
role of the good data steward is to get the total nerds on one side and the total nerds on the other side and translate.
Exactly.
And so you need to be in between, because the total nerds will never be able to communicate outside their silo. They're just
That's always
on both sides, and not just the data scientists. Also-
Fish,
clinic.
nerds, just being as insulting as we possibly can.
Yeah, sure. But I have a cartoon on it. Somebody asked for them today, but you see these 2 silos, and the guy with the ponytail and the other lady sitting with a microscope, and you see the text balloons, and the center is empty. They don't get it. If I say model, I use, I mean something completely different than when Louis says model. Yeah. I think mouse model. He thinks a conceptual model or whatever.
It really happened to me.
Yeah. My apologies. We're already almost 10 minutes into our lunchtime, and I've having too much fun to pay attention to the clock. So I'm gonna rather brutally say thank you all very much for the questions. And questions are live, so I'll try to see if we can answer them in the Slack so that people can have a conclusion to their things. And unfortunately, I can't do the joke with Barend Mons wanting to kill everybody in the first 10 minutes of the talk. So we'll have to suffer this. So gracefully, hopefully, really thank all the panel members, Lydia Pintscher, Mark Wilkinson, Sabine Osterle, and Barend Mons for their time. And it's great that you were here for us. Thank
Pleasure.
you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.